The soft golden light of the setting sun filtered through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow across the countertops as I prepared dinner. The gentle hum of the radio provided a soothing backdrop to my thoughts, which kept drifting to my son David, who had just returned home from college for the weekend at 21. David was no longer the little boy who used to follow me around the house, peppering me with endless questions about life. Now he was a young man, tall and confident. The notion triggered a wave of pride and nostalgia in my heart. "David, supper is ready." I cried out, my voice carrying. He walked in the doorway of our humble house seconds later, his presence filling the room in ways I wasn't expecting. As we sat down to eat, I couldn't help but notice the way he stared at me. There was an intensity in his gaze that made me pause. I dismissed it, attributing it to my imagination or the effect of the twilight light on our discourse. As we ate, he chatted freely about his studies, his friends, and how much he missed home. But there was something about the way he spoke, the way his eyes stayed on mine for longer than normal, that made me uneasy. It was a sensation I couldn't exactly describe and wasn't sure I wanted to investigate. After dinner, we chose to watch a movie together, slipping back into an old routine that seemed both comfortable and odd. The living room appeared cozier. The dim lighting and soft cushions created an intimate atmosphere that I hadn't anticipated. As the movie played, I found my attention divided. Part of me was focused on the screen, but another part of me was acutely aware of David's presence beside me, and I caught myself glancing at him more often than I should. The youngster I had reared was no longer there, as I saw how he had matured, replaced by a guy I was only just getting to know. It was during one of these furtive glances that I felt David's hand brushing against mine. The contact was brief, but it sent a thrill through me that I couldn't ignore. Surprised by the intensity of my reaction, I hastily drew my hand away. "What is wrong, Mom?" David inquired, his voice gentle and laced with worry. I gazed at him, my heart beating, unsure of what to say or how to interpret what had just happened. "Nothing, sweetie?" I managed to reply with a forced smile. "I'm just tired, that's all." But even as I said the words, I knew they weren't entirely true. Something had changed in that moment. The line between mother and son had blurred, and even though neither of us had crossed it, the air was thick with unspoken thoughts and feelings. We sat there in silence, the movie playing in the background, but I quickly replied, "I think I'll go to bed early," my voice sounding strained even to my own ears. "Good night, David." As I went away, I could feel his gaze on me, and I couldn't escape the sense that something fundamental had changed between us in the shelter of my bedroom. I leaned against the closed door, my thoughts whirling. I knew I couldn't allow this emotion to develop. I needed to keep my distance for both of our sakes, but as I lay in bed that night, sleep eluded me. I had no idea how to traverse this new perilous terrain. The love I had for my kid was pure and unconditional, but the events of the evening placed a pall over it. As I tossed and turned, images of David's upbringing rushed through my mind, providing an unexpected level of intricacy. I remembered the first time he called me Mama, his first steps, and the proud expression on his face when he learned to ride a bike. Those memories were unspoiled, pure, but now they appeared to reside in another universe, divided from the present by an invisible barrier. I told myself I was overreacting, that I was reading too much into an innocent situation. David was my son, I was his. Mother, that was all there was to it, all that could ever be. But as the night progressed, sleep eluded me. I couldn't shake the impression that we were standing on the verge of something dangerous, something that could change our relationship forever if we weren't careful. The next morning, I awoke feeling unsettled, the events of the night still weighing heavily on my mind. I took my time getting ready, delaying the moment when I would have to face David, but I knew I couldn't hide. In my room forever. When I eventually made it downstairs, I found David already awake. He greeted me with a smile from the kitchen table where he was drinking coffee, acting as if nothing unusual had occurred the night before. I allowed myself to believe that it was all in my brain, a strange moment that only I had observed. "In the morning," I responded, attempting a grin, and attempting to seem as regular as possible. "Good morning, Mom," he said, his voice relaxed and smooth. I was considering going for a trek later. "Do you want to join me?" I paused, uncertain whether spending more time alone with him was a good idea given how I felt last night. But then I reminded myself that this was my kid, and there was nothing wrong with a mother and son spending time together. "Sure," I answered, dismissing my misgivings. "It sounds pleasant." As I was preparing breakfast, I felt David's gaze on me. I attempted to appear normal in order to fall back. We resumed our normal routine, but there was an undertone of anxiety that I couldn't ignore. I found myself overthinking. Every movement, every word, worried that I would accidentally say the wrong signal later that afternoon. We drove to a nearby trail, a place we had visited many times when David was younger. The familiar surroundings brought back a flood of memories of David as a young boy, full of energy and curiosity, pointing out every interesting rock and leaf along the way. Now he strolled beside me as a man, our talk ranging from his college experiences to memories of previous family vacations. The air was fresh, the sky was beautiful blue, and everything felt normal for a moment. We walked side by side, discussing nothing in particular. I found myself laughing at his jokes, feeling more at ease with him, thinking maybe I had overreacted the night before. But as we walked further along the trail, there were moments where our conversation would pause, leaving a lingering silence that felt heavier than it should. These quiet moments were filled with an unspoken tension, a sense of something left unsaid hanging in the air between us at one point as we reached a clearing with a beautiful view of the valley. His gaze was so piercing that my heart skipped a beat. "You have always been there for me, Mom." He spoke softly but earnestly. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Something about the way he said it took me off guard, and the vulnerability in his tone made my heart hurt. I smiled, hoping to lighten the situation. "You won't have to worry about it." "Anytime soon?" I laughed. "I'm not going anywhere." But David did not laugh. He took a step closer, his gaze locked on me. "No, I mean it," he said. "You've always been more than just my mom. You've been everything." I froze, the words hanging in the air between us, heavy with a meaning I wasn't ready to face. I searched his face for some sign that he was just being sentimental. This was just an innocent moment of affection, but there was something in his eyes, something that made my heart race. Again, just like the night before David, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "You know how much I love you, right?" "Of course," he replied, stepping even closer. "I love you too, Mom." More than you realize, my pulse quickened. This wasn't how a mother and son were supposed to talk or look at each other. My mind screamed at me to step back to put some distance between us, but my body felt frozen in place. "I think we should head back," I said, my voice shaky. "It's getting late," but before I could turn away, David reached out and gently took my hand. The touch was innocent enough, but the way he held on and the way his thumb slowly brushed against my skin made my stomach twist in a knot of conflicting emotions. "Mom," he said softly, his voice filled with an emotion I couldn't quite name. "I don't know how to say this, but I've been feeling something. Something I shouldn't, and I think you felt it too," surged through me. I pulled my hand away, taking a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. David stopped. I said, my voice trembling, "You don't mean that you're confused?" He looked at me, his expression a mix of hurt and something else, something I didn't want to name. I'm not confused, Mom. He insisted I know how I feel. No, I said, shaking my head. This isn't right. You're my son, we can't. Couldn't even finish the sentence. The words felt too dangerous, too heavy to speak out loud. David took a deep breath. His face clouded with emotion. I know it's not right, he said, but I can't help how I feel, and I don't think you can either. Tears welled up in my eyes as I struggled to keep my composure. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. I had to stop this before it went any further, before we crossed a line we could never uncross. I'm your mother, I said, my voice breaking, and I love you, but not like that. I can't. We can't. The words hung between us thick and suffocating. I could see the pain in David's eyes, the way his shoulders slumped in defeat. He nodded slowly, looking down at the ground as if ashamed. I'm sorry, he whispered. I didn't want to make you uncomfortable. I swallowed hard, trying to push down the overwhelming mix of emotions swirling inside me. It's okay, I said softly, though I wasn't sure if it really was letting us just go home. As we made our way back down the trail, the beautiful scenery around us seemed to mock the turmoil I felt. Inside the drive home was suffocatingly quiet. David didn't say a word, and neither did I. The weight of what had been said on the trail hung heavily between us, making every passing second feel agonizingly long. I kept my eyes fixed on the road, my mind racing as I tried to process what had just happened. I couldn't believe the words that had come out of his mouth and the feelings he had confessed. It was as though everything I thought I knew about our relationship had been turned upside down when we finally pulled into the driveway. David muttered something about going to his room. I didn't stop him as he disappeared up the stairs. I collapsed. Onto the couch, my body trembling with the emotions I had been holding back since that moment. I didn't know how to make sense of any of it. David was my son, my baby boy. But he wasn't a boy anymore, and it was becoming terrifyingly clear that our relationship had taken on a complexity that neither of us had expected or was prepared to handle as the evening wore on. I found myself unable to shake the heavy cloud of confusion and guilt that had settled over the house felt eerily quiet. Each creak amplified the tension. That lingered in the air. I tried to busy myself with mundane tasks, washing dishes, folding laundry, anything to keep my hands occupied and my mind from wandering to dangerous places. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the memory of David's words on the trail, the look in his eyes. That spoke of feelings no son should have for his mother. I wanted to believe it was just a phase, a confused moment, brought on by the stress of college and the comfort of being home. But deep down I knew it was more than that, as I mindlessly flipped through channels on the TV, not really watching. As my thoughts drifted to David's childhood, I remembered the day he was born, how I'd held him in my arms and felt a love so pure and overwhelming it brought tears to my eyes. I thought of his first steps, his first words, the proud smile on his face when he learned to ride a bike without training wheels. Those memories were untainted, filled with the simple, unconditional love between a mother and child. How had we gone from those innocent days to this? Where had I gone? Wrong. A part of me felt guilty, wondering if I had somehow encouraged these feelings without realizing it. Had I been too affectionate, too close over the years? But that wasn't right, was it? Mothers were supposed to love their sons, to nurture them, to be there for them. That's all I had ever done, yet now everything felt tainted by the strange tension that had grown between us and me. Didn't know how to fix it. As the night grew later, I found myself standing outside David's closed bedroom door. I raised my hand to knock, then hesitated. What would I say? How could I address what had happened without making things worse? In the end, I let my hand fall back to my side and retreated to my own room feeling like a coward. Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying the day's events on an endless loop. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw David's face and heard his words echoing in my head. You've always been more than just my mom. You've been everything. The words that should have been sweet now felt loaded with a meaning I couldn't barely awake. I dragged myself out of bed, dreading the thought of facing David over breakfast. But when I made my way downstairs, I found in the kitchen. An empty note on the fridge caught my eye. Gone for a run. Needed to clear my head. David felt a mix of relief and disappointment. Relief that he didn't have to face him just yet, but disappointment that he had to face him at all. That we were already avoiding each other. This wasn't how things were supposed to be between us as I sipped my coffee in the quiet kitchen. I tried to think of a way forward. We couldn't go on like this, pretending everything was fine when it so clearly wasn't. But I also knew we couldn't simply ignore what had happened. The feelings David had confessed, and the ones I was desperately trying to deny myself, weren't just going to disappear. I spent the day in a haze. Going through the motions of my usual routine without really engaging with anything. When I heard the front door open in the late afternoon, my heart leapt into my throat. David was back. I heard him pause in the hallway, probably wondering if he should come find me or retreat to his room. After a moment, his footsteps moved towards the kitchen where I was preparing dinner. "Hey," he said softly. Hovering in the doorway, I turned to face him, forcing a smile. "Sweetie, how was your run?" David is not quite meeting my eyes. It was okay. Helped clear my head a bit, and an awkward silence fell between us. I busied myself with chopping vegetables, not knowing what to say, and David lingered. In the doorway, as if unsure whether he was welcome in the kitchen, "Mom," he finally said in his voice barely above a whisper, "can we talk about yesterday?" I sat down, the knife in my heart. Racing, this was the conversation I had been dreading, but I knew we couldn't avoid it. "Forever, of course," I said, wiping my hands on a dish towel. "Let's sit down." We moved to the living room, each of us perching on opposite ends of the couch. The distance between us felt both necessary and painful. David took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. "I'm sorry," he began what I said. "Yesterday, I shouldn't have put that on you. It wasn't fair." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. "David," I sighed, "I know this is confusing for both of us, but we have to be careful. This isn't how things are supposed to be." "To be between us, I know," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "But Mom, I can't help how I feel. I've tried to push it away to convince myself it's wrong, but he trailed off, looking lost. I felt my heart breaking. For him, for both of us. This wasn't a situation I had ever imagined myself being in, and I didn't know how to navigate it. David listened to me. I said gently but firmly, "I'm your mother. That's all I can ever be. You understand that, right?" He nodded, but I could see the pain. In his eyes, "I do," he whispered. I don't want to lose you, Mom. I'm scared that things will never be the same between us now." I reached out, taking his hand in mine. It was a risky move given the circumstances, but in that moment my need to comfort my child outweighed everything else. "You're not going to lose me," I assured him. "I will always be here. For you always love you, but we have to set boundaries, David. We have to be careful." For a long moment there was silence between us. The tension from earlier still lingered, but there was also an unspoken understanding that things couldn't continue the way they were. Both knew it, even if neither of us wanted to fully acknowledge it. "It may be," I said hesitantly. "Maybe it would be best if you went back to school. A little early. I think we both need some space to clear our heads." David nodded slowly, though I could see the sadness in his eyes. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Maybe you're right." The next morning I watched as he packed his things, the air between us thick with unresolved emotions. I wanted to hug him to tell him that everything would be okay, but I couldn't bring myself to do it, not after everything that had happened. When he finally left, the house felt emptier than it had in a long time. I sat on the couch, staring out the window long after his car had disappeared down the street. I knew we had both made the right choice by putting some distance between us, but that didn't make it any easier. The relationship between a mother and son was supposed to be simple and pure, but ours had become something far more. Complicated, something that neither of us knew how to handle as the days passed. I tried to settle back into my routine, but it wasn't the same. The house felt too quiet without David, and I found myself thinking about him more than I should have. I wanted to believe that the distance would help, that it would give us both the space we needed to sort out our feelings, but deep down I knew that things would never go back to the way they were before. A week after David left, I received a text from him. "Back safe, miss you, Mom." Those simple words brought tears to my eyes. I missed him too, more than I wanted to admit. But I also knew that missing him wasn't just about missing my son anymore. There was something else there, something I was afraid to name. I typed out several responses, deleting each one before I could send it. How could I express my love for him without crossing the line we had so carefully drawn? In the end, I settled for a simple, "Glad you're safe. Miss you too. Study hard." As I set my phone down, I caught sight of a framed photo on the mantel. It was from David's high school graduation. The two of us smiling broadly at the camera, his arm around my shoulders. We looked so happy. So normal, I wondered if we would ever have that easy relationship again, or if it was lost to us forever. The weeks that followed were a strange mix of longing and relief. I threw myself into work and hobbies, anything to keep my mind occupied, but in quiet moments my thoughts would inevitably drift to David. I wondered how he was doing, if he was managing to focus on his studies, or if he was as distracted as I was. We texted occasionally, keeping things light, and casually, neither of us mentioned what had happened during his visit home. It was easier to pretend everything was normal, to act as if we were just a regular mother and son separated by distance and busy schedules. But beneath the surface, I knew things had changed irrevocably. Every message from David, every photo he sent carried a weight it never had before. I found myself analyzing every word, every emoji, wondering if there was hidden meaning behind them. One day, after a particularly long day at work, I found myself staring at the photo album from David's childhood, page after page of memories, birthdays, Christmases, family vacations. I traced my finger over his smiling face in each photo, marveling at how he had grown from a chubby-cheeked toddler to the handsome young man he was now. As I turned the pages, I felt a deep ache in my chest. I missed the simplicity of those days when my love for David was uncomplicated and pure. Now that love had become tangled up with something else, something I couldn't quite define or control, I closed the album feeling a mix of guilt and longing. That I couldn't shake this wasn't how things were supposed to be. I was his mother, and that should have been enough. But as I lay in bed that night tossing and turning, I couldn't deny the truth any longer. The feelings David had confessed to, the ones I had been so quick to dismiss and push away, weren't somewhere along the line without my realizing it. My love for him had shifted into something more, something that both thrilled and terrified me. As dawn broke, I made a vision I couldn't keep living in this limbo, pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. I needed to see David, to talk to him face to face. We needed to figure out how to move forward. Whatever that might mean, with shaking hands, I picked up my phone and typed out a message. "David, we need to talk. Can I come visit you this weekend?" His response came almost immediately. Yes, please, I'll be waiting. As I began to pack a small bag for the trip, I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. I didn't know what would happen when I saw David again, but I knew one thing for certain. Our relationship would never be the same again, for better or worse. We were about to step into uncharted territory, and there was no turning back. The drive to David's college town felt both endless and far too short. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white with tension, as my mind raced through all the possible scenarios that might unfold once I arrived in the familiar landscape blurred past my window. But I barely noticed it. Too caught up in my own tumultuous thoughts as I neared the campus, my heart began to race. I hadn't seen David in person since that day on the hiking trail, and the memory of our last encounter was still painfully fresh in my, how would he react when he saw me? How would I react to seeing him? I pulled into the visitor parking lot. Taking a few deep breaths to steady myself before getting out of the car, David had texted me his dorm building and room number, and I made my way across the bustling campus, feeling out of place among the young students. Hurrying to and from classes, standing outside his door, I hesitated for a moment before knocking. There was a brief pause, then the sound of footsteps, and the door swung open. David stood there looking both familiar and somehow different. His hair was a bit longer than when I'd last seen him, and there was a shadow of stubble on his jaw, but it was his eyes that caught me off guard. They lit up when he saw me, filled with a mix of joy and something else I couldn't quite name. "Mom," he breathed, and before I knew if he had pulled me into a tight hug, I would have allowed myself to melt into the embrace. For a moment breathing in the familiar scent of him, but then I remembered why I was here, and I gently pulled away. "Hi, sweetie," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "Can I come inside?" David nodded, stepping aside to allow me to enter his modest dorm room, which was clean but plainly lived in, with textbooks scattered on the desk. With a few posters on the walls, I sat awkwardly on the side of his bed while he took the desk chair, turning it to face me for a long time. None of us talked. The quiet stretched between us, heavy with all we needed to say but didn't know how. Finally, David broke it. "I'm delighted you arrived," he replied quietly. "I've been thinking a lot about you and about our relationship." I nodded, my throat hard. I, too, confided to David that we couldn't keep going like this. We need to figure out what. This is what we're going to do. He bent forward, elbows resting on his knees. He added, "Mom, I meant what I said previously about my feelings for you. You're not simply confused or going through a phase. I've also attempted to push them away, focus on other things, but I know I interrupted my voice, which was barely above a whisper. I've been experiencing that as well, with the admission that the United States is altering everything and nothing at the same time." David's eyes widened, a combination of hope and amazement crossing his face. "You have?" he asked, his voice quivering slightly. I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my chest as a new one landed in its place. "Yeah," I answered, "and it frightens me. David, this is not how things should be between us. You are my son. I am your mother." "That should be enough, but it isn't," David remarked quietly. "And passionate Mom, I love you not just as my mother, but also as a woman, a person I can never alter." Regardless of how hard I try, tears build up in my eyes. "Oh, David," I moaned. "I love you more than I should, but we can't do anything about it." He nodded slowly, but his eyes were filled with turmoil. I know what he stated was rational, but it doesn't affect how I or we feel. We sat in quiet for a minute, the weight of our confessions hanging in the air. When I looked at David, I saw not just my son, but also the man he had grown into, gorgeous, intellectual, and caring. In another universe, in another life perhaps. But no, I couldn't allow myself to think like that. We needed to find a way to move on, to redefine our relationship in a manner that we could both live with. So what do we do now? David said, his voice quiet and hesitant. I took a big breath and tried to compose my thoughts. We acknowledge what we feel, I murmured. Slowly, we don't deny or push it away, but we also don't act on it. We can't. David nodded, his look a combination of resignation and relief. Then we focus on developing a new type of partnership. I continue with one. Can we be close and love one another while maintaining clear and defined limits that we both respect? David inquired, seeming suspicious. Can we simply switch off these sensations? I shook my head, no. I acknowledge that we can't turn them off, but we can learn to live with them and channel them into something we're both comfortable with. We spent the next few hours communicating in a manner we hadn't previously. We spoke about our concerns, hopes, guilt, and perplexity, crying and laughing together. Together and gradually began to plan out what our future partnership may be like. It wouldn't be simple, we both knew. That there would be times when the temptation to cross those carefully drawn lines would be almost overwhelming, but we also knew that what we had, the love between a mother and her son, was too valuable to risk. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across David's dorm room, I stood up to leave. We both knew I couldn't remain, no matter how much we wished I could. David remarked, "I love you, Mom," as he accompanied me to my car. Thank you for attending. For understanding, I drew him into an embrace, allowing myself to hold him close one final time before our new limits took effect. I love you too, sweetie, I said. As I drove home that evening, I had an odd combination of melancholy and hope. The connection David and I previously had was gone, replaced with sentiments we never expected to have. But in its place, we were creating something new, something that acknowledged the depth of our love while recognizing the boundaries of what that love might be. The path ahead would be difficult. I knew there would be moments of weakness, longing, and wishing things could be different. But as I watched the sun set beyond the horizon, painting the sky in pink and gold, I felt at peace. Settle over me, David and I would find our way through this. We would redefine our love, our relationship, in a manner that we could both live with. It would not be easy, nor would it be perfect, but it would be ours, and in the end, that was enough.